Right, good morning everybody. Happy Groundswell 2024. Welcome to this session, Clarity, Community and Ownership, Empowering Farmers to Successfully Outwinter. So, we haven't got a lot of time and I've got very many questions that I want to ask and hopefully you guys do too. So, just a really quick introduction to our panellists. Their bios are obviously all in your festival guide, so have a quick read up if you want to know more. But at the far end we've got Angus and Ellis. Angus is farming in Northumberland with his family, beef, lamb and turkeys. No more pigs. No more pigs. At this side of me here we've got Francesca Cooper. So Francesca's farming on the Isle of Wight. She has got beef, pigs and hens. And Emily Grant in the middle with two hats on today. So Emily farms sheep up in Scotland, but she's also an independent beef and sheep consultant. And she's been doing some work with the AHDB Beef and Lamb Monitor Farm up in Northumberland, who's been doing some bale grazing. So and I'm Amy Hughes. I'm Amy Hughes from the Beef and Lamb team. I'm neither a farmer or a consultant. I just like to ask a lot of questions, which is handy for you guys. Right, so there are two parts really to the theme of this. The first one obviously is outwintering and bale grazing. AHDB has been involved in a project with innovative farmers and Pasture for Life, and Emily's actually been involved in writing an economic report off the back of that, which is nearly ready. And the other part of this is the Clarity, Community and Ownership part. So for anybody that's familiar with our Roots to Resilience programme, they are the three principles of the AHDB Roots to Resilience programme. So on Instagram and Twitter, I've been using the hashtag Let's Get Touchy-Feely. Hashtag not literally, so don't worry. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the mindset, basically, as well as the practical implications of bale grazing. So let's get cracking. My first question to you all, I'll start with Francesca, is what led you to bale graze? Like, how did that business decision come about for you and your business partner Holly?
So we're new entrant farmers. We've only been farming for 2.5 years. We farm in a share farming agreement with our landowner. Predominantly it was because we had to limit our overhead costs. We have belted Galloway cattle, so they're suited to being outdoor all year round. I mean, they're suited to being outdoor all year round in Scotland. The Isle of Wight, they're hot all year round. So, predominantly it was a financial decision. It was also something that sort of sold us to the landowner because the opportunity costs of the barn space that would otherwise be keeping the cattle in, he now rents that out for a fortune to boat storage. So, it was part of the package, I suppose, that we were offering to keep the cattle outdoors all year round, so we could manage the whole estate, but with a very small footprint.
So it sounded like a no-brainer. Was there any reservations? Were you worried?
Yes. I mean, it's we have outwintered in conservation grazing for the first few winters, and then this year we were doing lowland bale grazing. We had lots of people telling us that it would be brilliant and that it works really well. We went up and saw Silas at FAI and he had very similar ground conditions to us, so we were sort of confident that it would work. I mean, there's been challenges. This winter was apocalyptically wet, and sometimes we just felt like we were drowning in mud. But I think that overall we were optimistic because we had a lot of positive, people have been telling us that it would work, and predominantly it did work. I mean, the ground is now quite rutted, which is making it difficult to work on in the summer, but we hope that as we improve the ground that we'll get less poaching.
And Angus, you've got a bit of a checkered history with bale grazing. Tell us about it.
Well, checkered history, full stop. Outwintering, I suppose we've got to go back to 2005 for us, is suckler cow and beef finishers. Back then we were part of a benchmarking group, put 15 good suckler farmers in the north of England together, and we benchmarked our businesses. At that time the average suckler cow in that group was losing £400 a cow, so that wasn't sustainable. It wasn't sustainable for us, even with basic payment scheme, which was basically making suckler cow farming a hobby really, because it was allowing people to accept them sort of losses, which now is just not acceptable. Then for us it wasn't acceptable. We had two mortgages on the go at the time, and we were just coming back into the business. So from that date onwards it was a mission to either get rid of cows or start and try and make them into a profit making enterprise and start and make them actually catch up with the sheep. So first attempted outwintering cows was in 2007. After 2 weeks of a wrecked field and a deceased cow, bless her, we had to pull the plug on it. It was right on the roadside as well, so it was very public, and yeah, we just had to bail out. The field choice was poor, the cow genetics were poor. It took us 10 years to pluck up courage to do it again. So what led us to it again was we knew that if we could reduce wintering costs, that was a big win for us. But equally so, we've just taken on some more ground with no sheds. So the option was either to start and build infrastructure, sheds, and equip the farm with machinery, or go for outwintering. So we plumped for outwintering, and since 2017 have developed a system from there, including deferred grazing and bale grazing.
Because it didn't go so well first time, and you said it was quite public, I'm guessing quite a few of your neighbours saw the incident that happened the first time. How was that a factor in your decision going forward to do it again? Like, how did you manage that mindset of, oh, people are going to be judging me if this doesn't look what they think it should look like?
So I was less worried about that. I think I was aware of the effect it would have on me, on father at the time. You know, like, he was very well known in the area for producing good cattle, and when I'm saying good cattle, I mean animals which were sort of Smithfield type fat stock cattle, and we had steers win the winter fair fat stock shows, so heavily muscled, good cattle. We were in the transition from that because it was obvious to us that it wasn't paying, and to be fair to Dad, he came along with us because we're both, Duncan and I, trying to back up our decisions financially. So I just felt at the time it was a step too far for him, since he'd been willing enough to allow us to start and change the genetics of the breed, the genetics we were dealing with. Yeah, it was just not fair on him. It didn't bother us so much. We were quite happy to have a go. In fact, from then we sort of developed our own sort of old grass wintering system from sheep, because I had this 40 hectares of grass shut up for cows. We then from then moved on to all grass wintering sheep.
And Emily, just talk us through, from the people that you've worked with that are outwintering, what are the common mindset traits and the common drivers behind people going into this?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, often it's a combination of factors, and I think we can't ignore, as everyone suggested as well, finances are obviously pretty important, because it's, particularly in our suckler cow systems, it's one of the biggest costs to be in wintering cattle within it. But I think also, and certainly with the Northumberland Monmouth farm, that was a key driver, particularly with the change to BPS. But also actually, so that farm has a mixture of hill ground, quite a good chunk of hill ground, permanent pastures, and then all the way down into cropping, a little bit of arable within that. And historically on that farm, the sheep were running on the hill, and the cattle were all pretty much in by and then housed over winter. So it also became actually about efficient resource use as well, because there's an element of actually sheep are quite high in terms of nutritional requirement for good productivity, and actually a suckler cow is perfectly well suited to being able to graze these more kind of permanent pastures and hill pastures. I think as well, and also certainly whenever we visited, you'd often see that the sheep would congregate in specific areas on the hill. So there were areas very heavily grazed on the hill, and a huge amount of ground out the back that wasn't. So by allowing some outwintering on there, by deferring grass on the hill from start of July onwards, actually allows you to manage that resource a little bit better. The quality doesn't decline too much on these pastures up there, but you can fence them as well, so there's a little bit of fencing to keep them. So actually it'll take a couple of years just to really see that come through, but I think they're actually utilising the whole farm resource in a lot more effective way, as well as having the savings of bit of reduced labour and reduced costs by not having them inside. I should say they do briefly come in around about February time until they calve in April. So.
Okay, brilliant. So we've all mentioned the economic benefits of doing this. What are your other, pick me top 2 benefits of bale grazing apart from the economics of it? What else has it done for your business and your system?
I think in our system we've taken on a farm that was very monocrop grasslands. We're using bales from Wildlife Trust reserves to try and get more seed into the ground. So it's a sort of a non-mechanical, using the cow to eat and trample and those seeds back into the ground. So that one, I think, is like one of our probably main reasons for actually starting bale grazing on the lowland, because at the moment we probably did have enough upland grazing to keep them on hill grazing, which would be much less muddy. But we wanted to try and get that diversity into the grass, rather than just conventionally overseeding, which lots of people say they have big failure rates on, trying to get that biological activity, trampling in the extra organic matter and things as well. So that's one. You want another one?
You can stick at one if you want.
I'll stick with one.
Okay. Gus, go on.
I think I enjoy being in learn mode, and I enjoy learning off peers who are doing these sort of systems, and they are there. There's all, whenever somebody says to you, well, that can't be done, I'm sure as damn it you'll find somebody who's actually doing it, and I enjoy that. I enjoy going to the farms and meeting these type of people and seeing what they're doing, and then developing it and tweaking it for your own system.
Yeah. Emily, apart from the economics, what other things have you seen coming out of the project?
Yeah, and certainly in the project we did ask, because there are some things, as Francesca's alluded to, that are quite hard to put a value on. So we did ask those questions as part of that. It's like, well, what have been the other benefits? And yeah, a lot of things come through, like increased biodiversity, particularly when they're deferred grazing as well as bale grazing. And it's actually quite a lot to do with work-life balance, and certainly one of the participants who did house from kind of November all the way through till April was saying that he actually gained his summer back, because he was no longer spending early summer mucking out the cords and then hauling a lot of silage and then hauling straw back in. So he actually completely changed his work-life balance by doing that. And again, that's what I mean, we talk about resource use efficiency, but actually we shouldn't forget ourselves within that we're a really key resource, and that work-life balance and reducing that time input is really important.
So Francesca, you mentioned the delightful winter that we've had this time. Outwintering can't have been easy this year. There must have been some incidents or stuff that wasn't quite going right. What has motivated you to keep going on a year like this when it must just have been really difficult? This year I think we sort of jumped in. We didn't leave enough deferred grazing on the hill because we knew we were going to be doing this. So I think in some ways we jumped in with both feet. We did at the very end, I think when it carried on raining, I think it was about April, we did throw them out on a bit. Finally, we just got too much. I think it's just, we jumped in. It was sort of our only option at that point to do it like that. And I think that we knew that it had worked up to that point. The actual slog of the weather, I mean, everyone has to do it. It's just part of being a farmer, isn't it? So. Yeah, and like you said, at the end of April, you threw in the towel. To me, that's not throwing in the towel. That's a business decision. It wasn't working what you were doing, and you had the option to do it. So I think that's a big part of the mindset where, especially with bale grazing, I think people quite often feel it's got to be quite rigid, but there's got to be some give in it, Angus, hasn't there?
Definitely. You can't go in just with one plan. There has to be other plans, and we used all of them this year. And I think that's we outwinter all our in-calf animals, and then we try and outwinter all the R1 heifers. So that's the weanling heifers as well, just to develop them in a system which they're going to be akin to when they become a cow. That is the tricky bit. I would say cows are pretty straightforward, as in, as long as they've got plenty bulk and it's half decent, getting good nutrition into young grown animals on an outwintering system is tricky, especially if you're not growing any crop. I would say you have to have plenty plans, and I'm not opposed to housing animals, and if you've got sheds stood empty and the wheels are coming off, then and you haven't got the system just right, then you've just got to bring them in. That's it.
You must have seen all sorts of weird and wonderful management decisions this year in the project, Emily. Go on, what have people been doing?
Yeah, I think not just within the project, but it has been a really challenging winter, and certainly where I am north of the border, it didn't stop raining between October and April. And I think that this applies to irrespective of whether or not you're outwintering. I think, as Gus says, it's really important to make sure that you have the plans A, B and C, possibly D as well, But it's, we can't control the weather. So the importance is not to try and focus too much on the weather, but is just to make sure that you've had that good think about, well, what the what-if scenarios. I think more importantly is when you get to the end as well, is just review if you're not happy with how it's gone. Make sure you just spend that little bit of time and say, well, what didn't quite work and why didn't it work? And how can we make it different next time round? And I think I see that regularly, irrespective of whether or not that involves wintering. You know, you can see it any time of the year because we've got such changeable climate now. All these things that are out of control, but just keep reviewing.
Okay, next thing I want to speak about before we open it up to questions is this community piece, because you've all mentioned it. So Gus, you mentioned the discussion group that you're in, the Suckler benchmarking group. Francesca, you mentioned learning from Silas, and you're obviously in our Roots to Resilience group. And Emily, I know you've got a huge involvement with multiple groups. When you're thinking about changing system and doing something that maybe isn't the norm, such as outwintering yet, how important is it to have that community of people that you can bounce ideas off around you? Like, how valuable do you find that?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, we have one other farmer, I think, on the island who does, on the Isle of Wight where we are, who does outwintering like we do, and they have a lot more hill ground than us. So having a community across the whole country is completely invaluable, and also having people that you really trust and respect in that space as well. Yeah, and also paying for advice. I mean, I think we're going to pay for some more advice going forward, because actually it's fundamentally we're saving a lot of money by doing it, but we want to do it right because we want to do the right thing for our animals and for our soil, and for, you know, to make sure it works in the long term.
Gus, how about you? I know you've been involved in a lot of community, discussion groups and the likes.
Yeah, and it's always good to be able to pick up the phone or just WhatsApp pictures to people and go, what do you think of this? I mean, I suppose we've been doing a little while, so I tend to get quite a few WhatsApp pictures of people's wrecks. Look what you're responsible for. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it is important to have a community around you, and the people that you're working with, if they're on board with you, if you're ploughing a lonely furrow and you try to convince your staff or your members of family who you're working with that this is the idea, then you've just got to tread really gently and go with it. I was very lucky at support of the staff, and you know, brother was all on board for this, so we were able to try it and probably go in harder and faster than a lot because of that, and then be aware that at some point you have to pull back from, you know, it. But yeah, I'm always keen on a knee-jerk reaction. So
how do your guys
I think whatever stage you're at, community or just having support, the wider support, because, you know, we do tend to work as individuals, businesses in farming, and whatever stage you're at, music to my ears about paying for advice, because but that's not me just trying to sell what I do, because I think, you know, when you go to countries like New Zealand and they see paying for advice actually as hugely beneficial, because it generally gives them quite a good return on investment. And I think for various reasons in this country, and I know because I used to work for QMS, we provide a lot of stuff for free, and it's really hard to then be able to go and kind of sell services. But I think, don't be scared, you know, my mechanic probably costs more than I do per hour, you know, and I think we forget some of these things sometimes. But I think it just in the wider community, and as I said, I work with guys all through the stages, whether they're beginners or really advanced people, and still the people you would class as advanced have a requirement for, it's almost like coaching. And even when you think about it, using a New Zealand analogy as well, it's like even the All Blacks have coaches. You know, there's still the requirement just to have somebody to bounce things off, or just to bring fresh pairs of eyes into it. So don't ever lose that.
And I just say as well, I think we're so lucky to have what we have up in Northumberland with the monitor farm that Emily's been running along with the AHDB. It's a fabulous example of being able to just watch something develop, you know, and then be able to have meetings throughout the year to discuss the rights and wrongs of it and what went wrong. So I would just encourage everybody to get involved in that sort of thing, or in the monitor farm. And you know, if you are thinking about it, then come up to Northumberland and have a look around the monitor farm, because I must say Harry and the family have really done a great job in embracing the whole thing.
Right, okay, before we open up to questions to our audience, Emily, will you just give us some of the key economic information outputs from your report.
And I will just add, actually, I'll be doing a slightly longer. It'll be in the seminar tent at 2:00, and you'll get. I've got slides.
I banned slides for this.
So if you want a little bit more detail, but with a slight caveat, the groups of farmers that we work with are all part of the Pasture for Life, plus the Northumberland Monash Farm. It's a real range of farms, and it's really the take homes are different for each farm. But I think probably the key savings were coming through, particularly generally to be bale grazing versus in wintering housing, was roughly on average a 50% reduction in labour time to do it. It's pretty quick to go and lift a wire and roll out a couple of bales. One farm in particular, we got some really good data on his fuel usage, and he was a full-time in-winterer, moved to outwintering, and he has a 72% reduction in his fuel usage on the farm, which is partly through just different machinery and equipment. You know, he now just uses a buggy and a bale unroller rather than mixer wagon, tractor, etc., etc. But I think some of the headline figures coming through were actually just the savings in straw. Now, straw's really expensive already this year, and only getting more expensive. So for those who don't grow their own, and even if you did grow your own, you have an opportunity cost to sell that straw. So that's looking like quite high at the moment as well, a significant saving. But it'll totally depend on your system and where you start from. I think the most important thing, just be on top of your own system, what your costs of production are, etc., where you think those savings are going to come, and just how you can fit outwintering, because it doesn't have to be all winter, but how you can fit even a couple of months or a couple of weeks in just to help you save cost.
Your top tip? And Angus, what is your one top tip for anybody thinking about doing this?
Get the right kit on the quad bike. So it's really fast to set up your areas. I think just investing in it, or you can get grant funding quite often, FIPL and things like that. Having the right kit so you can just go out and set up areas quickly to make that extra saving. It's really good.
I would say don't try and make round pegs fit square holes, and that relates to genetics. You know, if your cows aren't of that genetic trait to cope with being outside in the winter and being asked questions of, then you probably don't want to be starting with them. You've got to be really gentle. Yeah, so I would say take a look at the genetics of your herd.
Okay, anybody got any questions? Have we got some microphones or not?
Thank you. Regarding putting out species-rich hay, are you seeing results in how species coming through on your own ground?
So this was our first year, and our monitoring was not what it should have been. So we weren't exactly sure where the most species-rich grass was. We also have a big problem with creeping grasses. We may end up doing a full reseed on some of our pastures actually, but I think it will be incremental. Like, I know that FAI, it took quite a few years for them to start seeing things really develop and take hold in those areas, but I mean, it's been a bit slow, and we've grazed it quite hard in the spring, so I'm not sure we'd see much yet. So I think we need to rest it a bit later, and then we might see some stuff developing. But
hello, it was a question to Angus really. Are you keeping your finishers out winter, that second winter, or are you finishing before?
No, so we get rid of, so we wean November, December, 6-7 month old. Steers go inside, heifers stay outside, then they'll go up to grass, and we'll try and finish as many off grass at 18 to 20 months, and then we just draw a line and go what's left to store. We don't put another winter on them, no.
Any more for any?
Sorry, I might have missed the first few minutes. I don't know if you talked much about soil type. Have you got any suggestions for people on heavy clay denture soil?
we're on heavy clay, yeah. So yeah, we're on heavy clay with springs, so we have water coming from the top and underneath. And so it was a very wet winter. I mean, overall it worked really well. We saw it. It was bouncing back within weeks. The only thing that we have found is we've got quite a lot of like rutted ground, so it's quite hard going working on it now in the summer. But fundamentally, it doesn't look like it's actually caused that much damage. The grass sort of all bounced back again. And actually, it was just about workable. We rolled quite a lot of the bales by hand because I'm not sure in some of the areas you'd have been able to get the bale unroller out to them. We didn't have one at the time. We are getting one this year, but we'll experiment with that. Some places we had to walk out to. But as far as moving cattle, we moved them every day. We varied the size of the cell a little bit. We found that on days when it was actually raining, we got a lot of earth coming up and just trashing the grass. They couldn't eat it, so we made the areas a bit bigger. But I mean, fundamentally, it worked. We are bottomless, very, very wet clay.
Yeah, we're heavy clay as well on a lot of it, although not big rainfall. So you got to bring the context of your own farm into the situation. I would say for us, the deferred grazing works better on the heavy clay. They're old pastures, so we graze a lot of sort of upland and rig and furrow pasture. Just with the third with no bales on, I would say make sure you've got good covers. Don't attempt to take everything off that cover in the one go. Maybe accept that you come back to it later in the winter or start of spring. Just be aware of your own context, and the only way you'll ever find out is just by trying a little bit. Yeah.
One more question for Emily. You began to hint at some straw savings. Have you got any figures, ranges you can say on that?
For certainly the two bigger farms, which one's running 220 head of surplus and the other I think was 120 odd. They're saving 1,000 or 1,500 bales a year. Yeah. And also, I think one thing that struck me slightly as well is just about the way we run these things is that both were also buying straw to feed, i.e. to balance silage rations when they were on the in-wintering system. So there's a little bit that makes you think, well, and I know partly why, because silage can be stored easily outside, but they're then outwintering them and feeding them hay with the deferred grass, which is quite a nice balance. So it begs questions sometimes of why are we feeding straw to balance a silage ration inside. Now I know there's practicalities there. Sometimes people have got both sheep and beef and it can be quite hard to get the right quality for each species, but yeah, when straw's that price, I think we need to really think quite hard. And the sun's shining, make hay.
Okay, last question over here, then we're gonna wrap it up.
Hi, thank you very much. It's really more of a practical question in regards to, have any of you considered putting bales out before, so pre-planning, putting them all out in the field and then just moving your fences around it? Is that something people have experimented
That's
with?
what we do.
That's what everyone does. Everybody puts, So one of the advantages of it is that only one in the bale grazing project actually made hay in the same field that they then bale grazed. Everyone else was making hay elsewhere, but they were carting it direct from that field out, so that you only get one handling rather than coming back to the yard, stacking them and then taking them back out in the winter. It also means that you're actually laying them out when ground conditions are good. So that's, to me, that's a no-brainer because you remove that additional handling effectively.
Yeah, I would say on that, we'll have fields getting set up next week. There's hay cut, so the bales will be going out and then allowing the grass to defer for early winter. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, I'm going to call it to a close there. These guys are very kindly staying around for a little bit if you want to pick their brains. But I'd just like to thank Angus, Emily and Francesca for joining us and giving up your time. We really appreciate it. Keep an eye out on the AHDB website for Emily's report when it's on there and published. If you're not receiving emails and information from us, there's some QR codes to the preference centre. Get yourself an account logged, sign up for an account, and then you can tell us what you want to receive. And thank you for coming. I hope you all have a great festival.